with my hands.
So 3 Podcasts, I am Robert.
Yes, and I am Reggie.
We all know his name. He's back for the 3-peat. That's Matt Rederer. Thank you, Matt, for joining us.
Thank you guys for having
again.
me. No, I appreciate
Something
it.
like the Golden State Warriors out here, huh?
Yeah, I know.
Just like that, Reggie. So it's awesome because you come back the same time of year each year, which is strategically right around the cold time of Chicago.
Yes, I know. It just happens to work out that way.
And you look beautiful in that pink
thank
shirt.
you.
It actually matches Reggie's pink drink, if you
Look at
didn't
that.
notice.
It does.
Yeah.
Nothing like pink lemonade before a podcast.
But again, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
We're going to dive into it. I know we've, well, first of all, just kind of tell us what's going on in your life since we last saw you a year ago.
Just doing a lot of teaching, still running Right Advantage, which is, a great resource for a lot of individuals out there looking for MRSO, cardiac MR, regular MR training. And that's pretty much it. Still working at a hospital, trying to get some experience there again. Always trying something new.
How many hours do you usually do a week?
Oh man, I'm maybe doing just a couple hours, maybe 5 hours a week, if that, on average.
Right.
So barely anything, but at least enough to keep the skills up and stay connected.
Right.
So
hands on the patients, right?
You bet.
Yeah.
Can we say what vendor you're working with?
Siemens typically.
Is it?
Yeah. So.
Okay, very cool. Well, today we're talking about like just B1+RMS and why you would use that over SAR when it comes to scanning devices and these sort of things.
Yeah.
So maybe kind of dive into it. Like, first of all, what is B1+RMS? What does that stand for? What does it mean?
And why is there a need?
Right? Exactly. So that's a perfect question. So typically we go by SAR. SAR is like the term that we all know, specific absorption rate. So when we're trying to investigate some type of implant, they'll give us a SAR limit, but really it's an estimate. And we don't like estimates for the most part. If we're trying to be exact on what type of issues we're going to be having with our patient, if they have an implant, I want to be as exact as possible. And that's where B1+RMS steps in. It's more exact. So it's actually not an absorption. SAR tells us how much energy that patient's going to be absorbing. B1+RMS basically tells us how much energy is being delivered to the patient. So what is that energy being delivered to the patient? It's a little different, but it's more accurate than SAR.
Is it an acronym? What does RMS stand for?
It's a root mean square.
Okay.
Yeah, root mean square. So when you look at the entire thing, we could look at it as there's an B1 field, which is the RF field, and that's where we get the B1 from. Mm-hmm. The plus is the positive part of this waveform. So there's a positive part of this waveform, and that's the energy yielding component of it. And then we average that over 10 seconds, which is the root mean square component. So it's a B1, it's the RF, the positive part of that, the peak, the hill of that waveform, that sine wave. And then we have this root mean square, this average over 10 seconds. So we can look at that as more accurate than SAR. SAR is an estimate. There's a lot of factors that go into SAR that may not be as accurate as a B1+RMS. There's, for example, we would say if I put something in the system wrong, what if you put the wrong weight in or the wrong height? It might calculate the SAR differently. Sure. If a patient has maybe is heavier than another patient, or how they hold the weight. Different tissues have different levels of conductivity and permittivity.
Have you heard like about head first versus feet first type of thing, like how that can throw off the calculation of SAR?
Yeah, I heard it with certain vendors. And I know I think Siemens is one of the vendors that talk about head first being more accurate than feet first. And I think it has something to do with their sensors in the table or how they break up the body and how they measure SAR.
I've heard that's actually why they suggest leaving the head coil on, even if you're doing like a pelvis or an abdomen.
Okay.
Dang, tips and tricks already.
Yeah. Well, they used to say, take it off, but actually now they're saying leave it on. And I hope that that's still the case. That's what I'm telling everybody I train.
Right. Well, and one of my pet peeves, and we've always are told like it's
what really grinds your gears,
it
Reggie.
really grinds my gears. Hopefully that's not a trademark. But they always tell us like big patients are going to SAR out. But I've noticed it's not just big patients. A lot of times, especially on 3 tubes, it's usually like either muscular patients or people who don't have a lot of body fat. Is there a reason for that?
And it goes down to, how, so first of all, how is SAR created in our patients? So SAR is not just specific to MR. I mean, we have SAR for our phones. Our phones are being tested for SAR limits. So it's a non-ionizing radiation that we're talking about. So this SAR is typically on the surface of we have this RF exposure on the surface of our patient, and we're looking at the surface of our patient, but this RF penetrates our patient, creating these little eddy currents in our patient. These little currents hop on conductive pathways. So they'll jump on muscle and they'll jump on other tissues. And then let's say they have something that has a low permittivity, something like fat, and they just hit the brakes, and then we have this heating, this hot spot in our patient. So our patient is actually conducting some of this as well. And this is adding to depending on the conductivity and the permittivity of the tissues in our patient, will determine that heating in our patient. So now, depending on how the patient holds their mass, will determine, where they heat up, where those hot spots on their body, and some of the.
So if they got the dad bod with the big belly, then it really doesn't matter, or it wouldn't.
I mean,
it just depends. Right?
It would all depend on where the RF is being exposed to, and so we have different types of SAR limits, right? There's the head SAR, there's the body SAR, the partial SAR, and so depending on where that is, will determine.
Well, I'm curious, like who decides which you're going to monitor? Like, is it the facility? Is it the radiologist? Is it the physicist? Is it the device manufacturer?
What do you mean? What monitor?
Like, are you looking at SAR? Are you looking at the B1 value?
Okay.
SED.
It would probably come down to the manufacturer of whatever we're limited by from the implant standpoint. So a lot of times active implants shift more towards the B1+RMS I've seen.
Nice.
And that's not always the case, but in a lot of situations, like when we have an active implant, they would have a B1+RMS limit.
Right.
Yes, I think there's still some out there, a lot of them out there that still use SAR as the limit. Stay in normal mode, or you can go to first level or 2 watts per kilogram. But for the most part, B1+RMS is trying to be more adopted into this active implant because it's more accurate.
And it's kind of a projection. So the amount of RF that is needed is projected until after you start the sequence, right? So it's not like you can save a protocol, and Katie might be able to speak to this. You can't really save a protocol with a set B1RMS, or can you?
No, you can't really save it because it's going to be different for every patient for the most part. But what you can do is you can build a pause in there. So I always build a pause at the beginning of my sequence where it'll start to do its pre-scan, stop, and then I'll look at the B1+RMS, so it's predicted.
Perfect.
And then that's how I usually do it.
Nice.
For B1+RMS.
Nice.
Well, I'm trying to think. I know Philips has something where you can kind of, what is it, ScanWise?
ScanWise, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Right. Which is really kind of neat, where you can just click a button and set these thresholds really low.
Dang, that's interesting.
Yeah, so then you can keep it as low as possible and still get an image.
I have no experience with that. If any of our watchers have experience with ScanWise, please leave a comment and let us know, your experience working with that, because I feel like that's super innovative. I don't know why all the vendors aren't kind of doing something similar.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. It is pretty innovative. Right. So
nice.
Well, and then I know that we also take in consideration circular polarization when we're doing some of these active implants. Can you kind of explain what that is?
Yeah. So circular polarization is how we're delivering this RF energy. And for the most part, we're delivering it around our patient. There's not this linear transfer of energy. But I think when we're looking at it, we can change the different modes on our system. We're trying to set it up where we have this continuous non-overlapping RF going around our patient. That's a circular polarized mode, the circular polarized mode. And what the theory is it's going to keep the SAR limits as low as possible, because we can look at it from like RF shimming, where we're trying to RF shim on most situations where we have overlapping RF. But when we do circularly polarized, we're not doing that. We're just exposing our patient all around them with this RF. And so that usually keeps the dose down a little bit lower.
Huge benefits to that, especially with probably implants that keep that B1RMS number kind of low, right? It kind of gives you a little bit more that you can probably either plan more slices or get a little bit more TR out of that, right?
Yeah, but for the most part, it'll say scanning pregnant patients, you want to keep it circularly polarized, or certain implants, it'll say in there, CP, circularly polarized. Right. So you want to just make sure you're in that mode. And depending on the type of RF transmitter you're using will determine, what your options are in terms of those modes.
Is there a reason why you couldn't just use that on anyone all the time?
I don't think so. I think from an image quality standpoint, there might be something with that, because when you're normally doing your exposure to your patient, you're overlapping some of that RF, so you're kind of cleaning it up. And the way it's been explained to me, it's kind of like an RF shimming, where a normal shim, a magnetic shimming, is you're using active or passive shimming to maintain a uniform magnetic field at isocenter. But you're kind of doing the same thing for RF, how we typically deliver it, just trying to keep this nice uniform RF around our patient. But when we switch it to circularly polarized, we just kind of bypass that. Right. And that's how it was explained to me.
Nice.
So.
I think that makes sense for sure.
And because we're talking about Siemens and that's who you work for and that's your experience, I know that we do have to put those pauses on, and we do make sure that it's under a certain value. I imagine we're going to dive into it eventually, but I'm curious, like, what's your first step when it comes to adjusting certain values to make sure you stay under? I know, like, TR, increasing the TR,
flip angle,
the TE, like
for sure. There's a few factors that really affect the RF exposure to our patient, and it's number one, the flip angle, right? That energy we deliver to our patient, how much energy we're actually giving to our patient. It's the TR, so how long is that duration that we have? And then another big one is the duration of RF pulse. So you've probably heard, if you work on Siemens, low SAR, normal or fast mode.
Right.
But when you go to low SAR mode, you deliver that RF over a longer period of time. So how I look at it is kind of like if you were going to go and try to tilt our magnetization to the transverse plane, you can either punch it into there as hard as you can with a short burst of energy, a lot of energy, short burst, or you can gently push it over a long period of time. And so when we look at duration is probably the best way to reduce our SAR, and in turn reduce that B1+RMS as well, because they're going to affect each other. SAR uses B1+RMS to do its calculations.
Right.
So it's kind of factored in there.
One thing I feel like that doesn't really get explained well, at least when you're going through MR school, you're taking your physics courses and stuff, is the difference between the flip angle and like your initial RF pulse, right?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that?
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. All right. So typically when we're looking at RF pulses, we have different uses for them, right? The first one is our excitation pulse, right? We excite our hydrogen. And I look at that as like the gun to start the measurement. What we do is we measure magnetization in our patient. We measure the recovery of longitudinal magnetization and the decay of transverse.
Right.
So if we have this situation where we deliver this excitation pulse, I start the timer. I drive down the longitudinal magnetization. I increase all my transverse magnetization. And then I wait a period of time until I deliver my next RF pulse to tilt that remnant signal into the transverse plane. Right. So this second pulse that we sometimes get is this refocusing pulse. That's spin echo sequence. And all that does is rephase our hydrogen. And I do have a slide, I think, in, I don't know if it's here or not. Let me see if I can find it, where it talks about this refocusing pulse, this 180-degree refocusing pulse. And let me see if I can find it here, but we'll talk about it here. But so this refocusing pulse, this 180, essentially takes this transverse signal and refocuses it back up so we can take a measurement, another TE. And we keep doing this over and over and over again.
Right.
And so we call that echo train length in the spin echo sequence. So anytime that you change your echo train length, you're adding more 180-degree RF pulses within this TR time.
Right.
So imagine that. Imagine flip angle being a problem. All right. So flip angle is a problem.
Right.
There's a squared relationship between flip angle and SAR. So a 180-degree RF pulse holds 4 times the energy as a 90-degree. Okay. So imagine our excitation pulse is typically a 90-degree RF pulse.
You did that math real quick, by the way.
Man's a genius.
I wish I could take credit for it, but I've said that so many times. Let's rewind that. I did the math.
I can see the matrix right in front of you.
So like on a Siemens, you would like decrease the turbo factor. Like, I know that's a consideration.
Yeah, the turbo factor, echo train length, so you could decrease that. So what you're basically telling the system is, in a given period of time, TR, from excitation to excitation, I'm going to deliver less 180-degree RF pulses. And we know 180 delivers so much more energy. Right. So if I cut those back, I can reduce my SAR. But let me ask you guys, what do I have to keep the same in order for it to have its effect? All right. So you
want to keep your echo train length the same, right?
Well, if you bring your echo train length down.
Oh, you definitely. Well, sometimes I automatically change the TR. So you want to keep your. Can I get a multiple choice?
Yes. TE or TR.
Oh, okay. You want TE.
Not TR. Your TR has to stay the same.
Increase.
Yeah.
Number of time to echo. I was thinking. Yeah. Okay, never mind.
Yeah. So we have a TR, right? A given period of time, and right now you want to shorten your scan down. That's the only reason why we want to use an echo train length, right? To go faster, right? So we click this thing up as high as we can until we max out our echoes. Well, we deliver all these echoes. Our scan time drops. We're like, yes, we won. But there's lots of problems that come with that. If we decide to decrease those echo trains, I'm collecting less echoes per TR. My scan time is going to go up.
Right.
But I'm going to get less heating in that given period of time. But if I cheat and say, well, I don't like my new scan time, I'm going to shorten my TR. I just reversed everything that I did to cut time. I still have to keep that TR the same. Right. I have to build that gap in there to allow that heat to release.
Well, and I guess we should speak to the trade-off of increasing your echo train length, right, too high. If your TR is kind of shorter than, too short to handle, a bunch of echoes, it pretty much causes like blurring, right? This is me trying to recover from getting that answer wrong.
No, yeah, you're right. It
Notice
blurs your
that?
image. Echo train length, if you increase it, it's going to blur your image
Right.
and substantially.
And that's one of the reasons why you don't want to have like a high echo train for a T1, because your TR is super short, right?
For the short TR, you're not going to be able to fit as many echoes in there. One, and then
Right.
two, it's going to affect your image overall.
Right.
So
So did I recover?
you recover.
Okay, cool. We can move on.
And I think we all kind of know this, but for the students out there, what would you say, which pulse sequence would have the most SAR or the highest B1 value?
I would say the single shot fast spin echo. Because think of it. I mean, you just apply the logic, all right? I deliver an excitation pulse and then enough 180s to fill my entire K space within one TR. So one TR, I have enough of these 180s to fill an entire K space. That's why whenever we run these single shots, the quality is probably not the best on these.
Right.
They never come out looking
Right.
really sharp. But on Siemens scanners and other scanners, they use a trick. They use something called half Fourier.
Oh, yeah.
So what they do is they fill at least 53% of your K space, and then they fill the rest with zeros. If you do that, you shorten your scan time, number one, and you need less echoes, and you can maintain some level of quality to them. So, and the big thing is it shortens your SAR. So, single shots, fast spin echoes in the field, the SARs, yes, are high, but not as high as they could be.
Right.
But from a theoretical standpoint, I think that would be the highest one. Another sequence that could be high as well would be just a fast spin echo with a high turbo spin factor, turbo echo, or echo train length value.
yeah.
So if you max it out, you can potentially increase that SAR pretty high. But any spin echo sequence is going to deliver a lot more energy. Anything that's RF heavy, so a lot of RF pulses, because RF controls the heating in our patient and the burn risk.
So
for our
pretty
patient.
much, I'm sorry, and we distracted you from the answering of that flip angle question, but the refocusing pulse is pretty much what we consider the flip angle?
So flip angle is just a general term saying that I'm delivering a certain amount of energy to tilt my hydrogen.
Okay.
Now there's the excitation pulse, which is like the initial one. That's like,
one.
I'm going to start this whole thing.
Right.
Start it with an excitation pulse. And then we can go ahead and do a refocusing pulse. And the purpose of that one is just to regain that loss of transverse magnetization. So we always have a nice echo. But over time, I look at it as like dropping a ball. So if you drop a ball, we have transverse magnetization. It's decaying.
Right.
The table's going to be the 180, so it's going to regain that transverse magnetization, and then it's going to drop again. You deliver another one, but it never goes to the same height, right? And it never gets the same amount of signal. You never get the same amount of signal quality to that echo. So the more that you let this thing bounce, the less quality, more blurring,
The more blurring.
your image is going to have.
Bingo. Nice.
So
Awesome.
that's echo train length for the most
Yo.
part. So the 180
man.
degree RF.
I feel like we're kind of jumping all over the place, but you said something that made me think, like with, ARDL coming out, deep resolve, these sort of things, like the way it samples that K space, like how does that affect it affects scan time, but that also does it help in terms of reducing patient's
Which
exposure?
one? I missed the.
Like,
So technically increasing your bandwidth definitely helps with SAR too, right?
So bandwidth is So is that what you were just saying? Receiving bandwidth?
no, I'm thinking more like deep learning, deep
deep
resolve.
learning. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to deep learning, you can do so much with it. You can kill your image with noise. Do everything you can to optimize your image itself with resolution and all of that, and still use that deep learning to get that quality image, that high signal image after everything. So.
I know, and with GE, and the reason why I brought up receive bandwidth, with GE, one of the biggest benefits is that they want you to boost that bandwidth, right? They want you to add as much noise to it. So that technically in turn kind of helps with SAR probably.
Yeah, and you know why? I mean, that's a really good thing, because it's going to segue right into SAR.
Right.
So why do we like this high bandwidth?
We like high band. Well, of course, with metal artifact reduction, right? We like that for that reason, but we also like it for lower bandwidth. Technically helps with signal. So it would be, I don't know, Robbie, you want to take this one?
Well, actually, I was just reading about that. I'm pulling it up right now. Like,
It's more.
so you can
Yeah.
this can possibly decrease the TE.
Yeah. So if you
center.
yes. So if you
That's
increase your receiving bandwidth, it's sample time. Receiving bandwidth is a time factor, and we never really think of it like that.
Right.
But our sample time decreases. An inverse relationship between sample time and our bandwidth. So when we increase this value in our receiving bandwidth, our sample time actually decreases.
Right.
Now that doesn't do anything that actually hurts us from a SAR standpoint, but it helps us from a quality standpoint. Our image, it's like we're listening to our patient in short bursts instead of just
Right.
listening to all this nonsense and then trying to make an image from that.
Right.
All right, so we like the high receiving bandwidth because it helps give us more accurate images.
Right.
But when it comes to SAR, like from a text perspective, if we didn't know that, we like the lower SAR. We like to decrease our SAR because what do we get? We get increased signal to noise, right?
Right.
It almost feels like free signal to noise.
Right.
And it increases the sample time, which in turn bumps everything out. It pushes those 180s out. It pushes everything out. So we actually decrease our SAR when we lower this receiving bandwidth.
Right.
So as we
Lowering.
decrease this lower receiving bandwidth, our acquisition gets longer, spreading everything out, and that gives us this decreased SAR.
And there are restrictions on scan time when it comes to a lot of these active devices. So just keeping track of the scan time overall
Absolutely.
is vital in assessing what's going on. I mean, I know we have physicists that we work with, and we have to make sure a lot of these are 30 minutes or less.
Yes.
And they're writing down to the second how much even a loc is and these sort of things. So
Oh yeah.
So to be more clear, because I don't want to confuse our viewers, it's decreasing receive bandwidth is what's going to lower SAR, not increasing.
Correct.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And then you can get the same effect by increasing your frequency encoding in your image matrix. You add more data points,
Right.
stretching out that acquisition window, doing the same thing, moving those echoes apart, getting more time for that body to dissipate that heat, and lowering that SAR.
Perfect.
So by decreasing it, does it also allow for a higher TR,
Decreasing which one?
the bandwidth?
So if you decrease, your receiving bandwidth, it increases our sample time. And it might actually start pushing those echoes out further. It might actually lengthen your TR. So you could potentially indirectly increase your scan time by decreasing your receiving bandwidth.
Right.
It doesn't happen all the time, but if you were to go to your site and just take that receiving bandwidth down as low as it possibly can go, it'll probably end up bumping your TR up just a bit. So it's just because it's spreading everything out. Your sample time is getting longer, your acquisition window is getting longer.
Right.
And I know me, like when I'm scanning these devices, the first thing I do is I change the flip angle down to like a 100, a 110 sometimes, and then I'm increasing the TR, I'm decreasing the echo train length, the turbo factor, and
So it's a good time to talk about the trade-off of lowering your flip angle, right? I guess at least with turbo spin echoes and fast spin echoes, right?
Yeah. So if you go too low with, so they usually say like, and I'm only going by what, I heard through Siemens is they like it 120. Don't go below 120.
I heard that's how we all kind of raised, right?
Yeah. And when you really start going, I do have images I could probably find and share with you guys. But I would shoot a sequence with 180s, and then I shot the same sequence with 120s, and you could see some lowering of the contrast to noise ratio in your image. So it does affect it, but it's still not like drastic enough to say, I'm never gonna do this again.
So when you say a lower contrast to noise, so your hypo or hyper intense, like your bright fluids or whatever, just don't pop as much.
It's more of just an overall image looks a little bit more washed out. Your image contrast is a little more washed out.
Okay.
So that's kind of what it looks like.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So there's other factors as well that'll help us. So we have like parallel imaging, for example, is another one.
That's
So
a
parallel
big one.
imaging just makes better use of those RF pulses. And because of that, we can use that to kind of help shorten it. It's not a direct effect to it. So if we really think of the things that are really going to affect our RF pulse, the RF energy, this direct SAR, B1+RMS, it's going to be the TR, flip angle, and then the duration of this RF pulse, how we deliver it over our patient.
Right.
So other factors out there that'll kind of help manipulate some of this stuff, but not directly impact it, but indirectly impact our SAR is parallel imaging.
Nice.
We have echo train length, which we talked about. That's going to indirectly affect that as well.
Right.
One that I always bring up, and I only use this one if I'm desperate. Like I've done everything in my power to reduce the SAR, and I'm still hitting a SAR, and I'm just trying to like push by a smidgen, like move by a hair.
Right.
Is I would decrease my phase encoding steps to as low as I feel comfortable going.
Oh, right.
Because if I have to collect less echoes, I need less 180s. If I'm doing a spin echo sequence. And if I need less 180s, in theory, I'm going to lower my
pretty much your.
So when you
phase
decrease
matrix,
this, you
right?
decrease the time as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so you could do that. Another big one that does directly influence this that I just popped in my head is the number of slices.
Oh yeah.
So
for
how
sure.
many slices we need.
So, yeah, and I understand that that's a factor or an option to consider, but most radiologists don't want you to
No.
decrease the coverage.
No,
you know?
But
but
there are some devices where you're only going to be able to get 1 or 2 slices.
So you do it in 2 packages, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Well, and maybe thickening your slice thickness slightly to be able to get more slice or more coverage
or a gap.
Or
I mean,
gap, or gap.
I mean, those are like extreme circumstances, I would say.
Right.
Typically be like the continuous slices, at a specific thickness,
Just off the top of your head, what kind of implant would you think that might be?
You want me to take this one?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Or Katie, go ahead, Katie. I would say spinal stimulators. There's one in particular that I think of that has been FDA approved, but the restrictions are
Never.
exactly. Never. I didn't want to shout them out, but the restrictions are very, very limited. Like you can pretty much scan anything, but you can barely scan anything.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like every body part, every type of coil. Yeah.
What about that
Right.
esophageal one?
Oh yeah, that's a good one, right?
Yeah. Is that one of them or no?
Yeah, it has a lot of restrictions on scanning zones too.
And for those of you who don't know, we've said it before, but Katie is our MRSO. She's behind the camera right now. But
She's not our MRSO, she's our MRSO. Big shout out, Katie.
Yeah, thank you very much. But yeah, we like having her. She's awesome. So she's kind of our go-to when we're scanning these devices.
Very
So
nice.
it's-
For sure. She's our go-to for a lot of things. So
Yeah.
we'd love to have Katie. Thank you.
So have you guys heard of hyper echo?
Oh yeah. Yes, but that's a great thing to kind of
You're
dive into.
hyperactive. is what
Oh
you're-
yeah, ADD. It's not ADD, huh? Okay. Never mind.
You're getting confused, Reggie.
That's awesome.
Hyper echo. What is that?
Yeah.
Siemens has hyper echo. So it's a button you click, and you keep let's say you keep your refocusing pulse at like 120, 130. And what it does is it delivers a pulse over at different flip angles. So each refocusing pulse is a different flip angle. It alters it. So maybe it'll send one out at 120. The next one's 130. The next one's another 140. And the next one's 130. The next one's 120. And it changes it over the pulse, over this TR, so it reduces the heat overall, but maintains some of that quality to your image.
I see.
So it kind of alters it as it goes through. So that's something that's unique, and it's, from what I've understood, unique to
Right.
Siemens.
And I hear like it's more effective with T1s, right? Which are usually our higher SAR sequences anyway, right?
Yeah.
They always talk about like these, how RF like exposure could cause heating in the patient's body, but like, what are like the consequences of that? I know we can get into
That's perfect. That's a great question, because it's like, why do we care so much about SAR?
It's,
Like,
it's an all right question, really.
Don't ruin this for me.
this is my moment. No, but it's so why SAR? So the whole fear is that we're going to start increasing the core temperature of our patient, right? So
Right.
we'll start adding energy to our patient, and their core temperature will rise to a point where they get heat stroke. Right, so that's what we're afraid of, causing this heat stroke to our patient. And granted, SAR is also connected to burns. So the higher the SAR, the higher the likelihood that a patient's going to get a burn. But let me ask you guys this: now that you know what the risk is, what do you think the number is of how many people have been harmed by heat stroke?
Now
I have never heard of any ever happened.
It has to be. I mean,
I would say 0.
less than 1% of patients that we scan annually, right?
0. There's been no cases that I'm aware of that I've heard of that have had heat stroke
Right.
from MRI. And it's probably because we're doing a really good job, or maybe it's not as big of a concern as we thought. But I probably think that we're doing a better job. We have better restrictions.
So would a contraindication of like a patient being scanned with an active device would be like if they had a fever at the time?
That's the one thing that we worry about. We ask those questions, like, do you
Right.
have a fever? Because
I don't think we've ever asked those questions.
really, there's like limiting.
Do
We
we?
limit the amount of core temperature increase in our patient based on what level of SAR we're at. Right, 0.5 degrees Celsius for normal mode,
Right.
1 degree Celsius for first level, because we don't want to increase their core temperature to a higher point. But then the question comes is, if they do have a fever, if they're already compromised,
Right.
and we bump them over the edge, is that something that we're concerned
I've
with?
told this story before, but I had a patient. It was an inpatient. The nurses said, "Why haven't you sent for my patient yet?" And I said, "Well, they have a severe fever."
Right.
And my coworkers did not support me in that. They were
Really?
surprised by that, and I was surprised that they were surprised. And turns out they ended up scanning them the next day when I wasn't there, and they even put them on the 3T instead of the 1.5 with warm blankets on.
Oh my god.
Well, and to kind of speak to that, one thing I think might have contributed to not maybe having heat strokes is that some of the vendors kind of put limitations on the amount of maybe SAR. I know Siemens maybe calls it SED, but they will only let you get to a certain point, and then they will pretty much
So
time out.
SAD,
Right?
SAR, specific energy dose, is different than SAR.
Okay,
So SAR
Yeah,
is
let's talk about SAD.
SAD, and a lot of people do have that question.
that's what I said. No, I'm just joking. Sorry. I'm here all day, folks.
All right, bro. I like that one.
So SAR is for every sequence. So like if I run, it's over a 6-minute period of time. So SAR is what is the energy over 6 minutes
Right.
that I'm delivering to my patient. So it's in watts per kilogram. Watts is more of a time energy factor over to our patient via kilogram. Now, SAD, specific energy dose, is just how much energy does this patient get? I don't care about over what period of time. You can scan this person for 10 minutes. You can scan them for an hour. What is the total energy this patient got? And so we measure that in joules per kilogram. Years ago, the IEC did have limits of what that SAD could be. And as from what I've gathered at this point, they've nixed that. That's no longer something that we're concerned with. But still, some systems have this relic of they might stop you or freeze you at a certain point and say, "Oh, you're getting close to a threshold," or "Oh, you're getting pretty high in the amount of energy this patient's receiving." But I have not heard, and this is maybe something for viewers to comment on, is that systems actually stopped you in recent times and recently has actually stopped you. And typically the threshold was 14,400 joules per kilogram.
You were getting close the other day on a
It was on
right?
a brain CTL with and without I was doing on a patient who was hyperstenic. And what I would do is just decrease the flip angle and put it into low SAR mode. I was scanning on a SOLA.
Okay.
But I was still getting the warning at the beginning of each sequence towards the end there.
And you'll keep getting those as you're climbing higher and higher, especially those long, complete spines that you do, those long ones.
That kind of brings up a good segue into like
I took his ball away so he wouldn't complain.
bad patient. But like burst pulses, like low SAR mode. These little. Are you familiar with those? Like how those kind of work? Do you
Low
want to
SAR
speak to
mode?
that? Yeah.
Yeah. So
like how that helps.
So that's some duration. So you have fast mode, which is a quick burst of energy of RF to tilt that transverse magnetization. Low SAR is a slow over a long period of time tilted. So that's why it lengthens our scan time.
So what usually is the parameters that are affected when you switch it to low SAR mode?
So typically it's going to increase your scan time. Your TR is going to bump typically. So you're going to notice an increase in your scan time from the TR increase.
Right.
Other than that, I think that's my first change. Anytime that I go into SAR,
Not echo train length or anything?
not echo chain length, that's indirect. Your direct ones are going to be your duration, your TR, your flip angle, and your number of slices.
Right.
Now, if I want to go in and I hit those big ones before I start moving to the secondaries, the echo train length, the phase encoding, the receiving bandwidth, the frequent, all those, I kind of wait on
Parallel
those.
imaging.
Yes, those are my secondaries, but it's always duration. I always go to low SAR.
Right.
I take the hit of just a little increase in scan time for a big impact or a big decrease in SAR.
Right.
That's like the biggest thing we can do to lower our SAR is just put it into a lower SAR mode, deliver that RF over a longer duration of time. And that's typically the best way to do it.
I think a lot of people kind of sleep on kind of getting rid of the SAT bands too.
Yes, that's a big one too.
Yeah, SAT bands cost you TR big time, right?
Mhm.
Especially
And
on a T1
a lot of
image. Yeah, and it's an extra RF pulse, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times they're in places that don't make sense.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially on spine imaging. So
Yes, especially spine imaging.
Yeah.
Yes, Reggie.
Right.
I'm curious, could you kind of help illustrate the difference between and why you would and you wouldn't use first level versus normal mode? And I know these are kind of Siemens terms, but like
No, I'm sorry. Which ones again? Low SAR.
like first level versus normal mode.
That's actually IEC. That's actually standard. That's international. So normal mode is going to be a mode where we try not to cause physiological stress to our patient. So we try to keep all of our limits down from a time varying magnetic field standpoint, RF and gradients, right? First level says I might introduce physiological stress to my patient. And if I do, it's within specific limits. Now we can move to second level, which is, we throw all that out the door and say, all right, well, we don't care. And that's reserved for research mode. We can't
Just
do that.
turn the fan up.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Go blow in there too,
Ready to
That's your
get in
second
there.
tech. That's why you need 2 techs.
I need 3 more people to help me blow.
I can make an inappropriate joke right now, but I won't. Okay,
That's
very
great.
cool.
Yes, and another big thing too that we could do to lower SAR is what we call them sandwiching pulse sequences. So you maybe have a heavy sequence, like a spin echo sequence, and then you sneak your gradient
Oh,
sequence in
interesting.
there.
I've never considered that.
Yeah,
But
so
that
then you
makes
have a
sense.
low SAR, and then you put your heavy SAR, low SAR, heavy SAR, low SAR.
Now you
Makes
want to
sense.
stay away from like haste, like those single shot gradient sequences, right?
Yeah, single shot fast spin echoes.
Fast spin echoes. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
so they're not even gradient anyway. So you're right.
So yeah, you hit those really hard. Like you maybe get one of those and they're starting to sweat. Then maybe put your T1 vibe in there, your T1, gradient, spoil gradient in there.
Right.
And then you sneak that one in there. And then you
You
go
go,
and
here
hit
you go,
it.
you big baby.
Jeez, you're sweating.
Throw a
in there.
vibe in there, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop complaining. All right, so when you say like surface area versus mass, is that kind of what you were diving onto earlier, where you said like where do they carry the weight and stuff? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, so like when you really look at the thermoregulatory system, our job is to regulate our temperature. We're constantly regulating our temperature. But when we deliver energy to our patient, we're delivering RF to our patient. And depending on the mass of our patient, we're going to start heating up our patient.
Right.
Well, our thermoregulatory system, what helps cool us down, is only the surface of our body. So it's our skin.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing that happens is we start to sweat, right? Evaporative cooling. All right. But we have other ways that we can reduce our heating as well. One is just stop exposing this patient to RF, right? Radiative cooling. And then we have convection, which is moving like a fan, turning that fan on. And then we have contact. So we can put like an ice pack on them. Sometimes if a patient's really sweating, I'll put an ice pack on the back of their neck or on your neck somewhere, or chest maybe, to kind of help cool them down.
Right.
That's another tool that we have.
Would you put an ice pack on an RF burn?
The risk of an RF burn. So like if a person has a tattoo and it's within 6 weeks, there's a high likelihood that they might get that burn, right? So I throw an ice pack on that. Or if they have staples that are close that might be touching, to reduce any type of heating that could potentially occur, I'll throw an ice pack on that as well.
Well, see, that's not something we've considered before, but that makes sense.
That does make sense.
Yeah.
And I know when it comes to like reducing burns from like BNS leads or DBS leads, they'll say transmit receive only, right?
Yeah.
You want to like, what is the purpose of using a transmit receive only versus just a receive only coil?
So there's 3 different types. There's transmit only, receive only, and then transmit receive. So we have, if we use the bird cage built into the actual scanner itself, that is going to be our transmit coil and our receive coil. So it's a both.
Okay.
And that's our body dose to our patient. So anytime you use the one built into the scanner, you're usually putting a coil on the patient and it's only receiving signal.
Right.
So it's a receive only.
Right. Like a phase array body coil.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Receive only. So
Receive
then
only.
if you have like a knee coil that's a transmit receive coil, or a foot coil that's transmit, or a head that's a transmit receive, that means that whatever we put on that body part is transmitting the RF and receiving it.
Is there an easy way for people to identify?
You can look on
different
that
from
coil
finger,
itself.
right?
The plug typically has an extra component on it.
Oh, okay.
And then if you read the insert manual or the manual on it, it'll say if it's transmit receive. And there's also a symbol. It's like a TR symbol with these wiggly lines that have different arrows to them.
Okay.
So-
I'll have to do a pop-up for sure. Nice. I know exactly what
So,
you're talking
yeah.
about. Nice.
So, and we can identify them that way as well, just those little pictures.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep. So other factors that we have are, like I said, that half Fourier technique is something that we can put on there where we fill like part of our case space and then we fill the rest with 0. So we don't need as many of these RF pulses.
Right.
in
Right.
there. So when you said something about limits, where the limits come from and what is, so the International Electrical Technical Commission put together a document that has all those limits in there for us for first level, normal mode, second level, all those modes, and what those limits are.
Mm-hmm.
And so that document itself is kind of what we follow internationally, so from every manufacturer. But in the US, the FDA has their own set of limits, and we typically follow those limits in the US.
Right. So like putting it in research mode means there's no limit, no cap.
No cap. You're free. You're free.
That's what all the cool kids say.
No
by the
cap.
way. No cap. You know what I'm saying? I'm still out there.
I want to say bussing for something. All right. Timestamp this so I can send it to my kids.
That's awesome.
So it is FDA that determines those limits.
Yeah, for us in the U.S.
Oh,
yes.
okay. And the International
Electrotechnical.
Commission or
Yes.
whatever, they are the ones who set, like, who do the testing and say, hey, this is first level, second level.
Yeah, they don't do the testing. ICNIRP is the organization that does all the research and testing, but the IEC enforces it, organizes that information into those levels, those modes.
For the vendors, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have those for the modes of operation.
awesome.
Yeah.
IGNIRP, is that what you said?
Yeah, ICNIRP, yeah. And what it stands for off the top of my head,
You got a steel trap up there. I wouldn't be surprised if you remember that.
International something non-ionizing radiation protection.
Dude.
What is the C?
Commission?
Yeah, maybe.
I'm going to put a big if you get it wrong. Though.
Yeah, you should. Please.
Loser.
A big L.
But right now you got to
Try
try because
again.
none of us know. So.
So B1 plus RMS. So it kind of like we'll kind of come full circle on that. So
Yeah.
B1 plus RMS. So we talked a lot about SAR. Well, B1 SAR uses B1 plus RMS in its calculation. So anything that we can do to affect our SAR to some degree will have some impact on our B1 plus RMS. But B1 plus RMS is that more accurate tool that we can use to help with reducing any type of heat to an implant. And that's typically where we see them. Like I said, we're moving towards more active implants using B1 plus RMS.
For sure.
So SAR is an estimate. B1 plus RMS is more accurate. It's a more accurate dose to our patient.
Nice. I only favor estimates when it comes to grading, especially in my geometry and calculus scores back in college, or in high school. I guess I didn't take geometry. in college.
Thank God for grade on a curve, right?
I know, right? One of the big factors I know sometimes that can kind of cause some heating, and if we have a patient that actually has like big SAR issues in the past, we kind of put them on the 1.5 anyway, but it's field strength, right?
Field
3T
strength, yeah.
versus
There's
1.5.
a squared relationship between field strength and SAR. Right. So anytime that you go to a higher field strength, you're going to introduce more SAR or have the opportunity for more SAR in our patient based on a higher frequency that we're sending to our patient. So we're sending more energy to our patient at a higher frequency because our Lamarr equation states that we're going to have a higher frequency going to our patient at 3T, approximately 128 megahertz, opposed to 64 megahertz-ish at 1.5. So a higher frequency, more energy entering our patient at a higher field strength. So we see more of this heating at higher field strength. So if anyone works on a 3T, typically you're hitting more of those SAR limits at a 3T than when you're working on your 1.5.
And at a higher field strength, do you need a higher RF to kind of get that equilibrium, like to kind of knock those protons a little bit better? Or?
Yeah, so you're tuning into them. So the Lamarr equation says that if I'm trying to tune into hydrogen at a specific field strength, I need to take my field strength, multiply it by what hydrogen precesses at 1 Tesla, which is 42.6 megahertz, and then I get this.
No, I'm joking.
I know. and then I can calculate what that precessional frequency needs to be. So at 1.5 Tesla, we're going to have a specific frequency. But as I increase my field strength, I need to meet that new precessional spin of hydrogen, which means I need a higher frequency to hit it, and tilt it, and actually manipulate it.
Awesome.
Dang. So I know, like we originally thought maybe 5-10 years ago that the direction of MRI was that the higher the strength, the higher was going to be the direction. But it looks like if anything, we're going to be kind of going the opposite direction.
7T has come to not necessarily a screaming halt because they're still out there and we're actually getting one, but there's some limitations that I guess they're realizing that it's harder to get past, right?
Yeah,
because of heating.
I saw just online that they had 11 and a 14.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Did you see that?
I did see that. Yes. And I think that when we go to the higher field strength, the whole idea is like I get more signal. I'm getting greedy. I get more signal. I can do more with my res, but
more noise too.
Yeah,
everybody
exactly.
gets some.
But now with deep learning, we don't really need that extra signal. Number one, and two, at higher field strength, susceptibility artifacts are more pronounced. Higher SAR, and now at 7T, we have to worry about how we're moving in the room because we could get dizzy as techs as we're kind of moving around.
Right.
So when we start decreasing that field strength and start using something like deep learning, we can still get high resolution images that are really nice. We can use something like that 0.55 Tesla MR unit that has low helium consumption.
Right.
And we could use these field strengths to get better, lower susceptibility in our image. We can use it to get lower SAR and just get better overall quality of our images, less dielectric effect in our image and all that.
Yeah.
Do you see like higher field strength still playing a role for certain type of procedures, maybe like where there's benefit? Because if we can kind of nail it with a 1.5
I feel like it has to be
UPL, then why even go 3T then, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just feel like it had to be almost like the perfect patient for one, and it's mostly clinical at this point, or excuse me, research at this point, right?
Yeah, because they've really struggled with just some of the trade-offs that we have. And I've heard that with 7T for sure, you just have to kind of think differently when it comes to trade-offs, like the parameters and everything.
Reggie was put on a 7T at Cambridge.
Oh, really?
You know, another link in the description if you want to see that experience. I haven't been right since.
They move them in super slow into ISO center. Could you imagine what 11 or 14 would be like?
Oh, right? It'd be 3 days later.
Yeah.
It was super slow. I do remember that specifically. Like she was holding it all the way to, you know, how Seaman has a little turn down.
So yeah, this is full speed. Like,
and you imagine those people that want to go to lunch, like, you know, they're always so busy going as fast as they can, like sitting there like shaking, like, no, faster.
Right. No, this is exciting. I mean, one of the best things about being an MRI tech, especially like this generation, is just the amount of advances, changes that are happening. It's super exciting, and B1+RMS is not necessarily a new factor, but it's one that is actually playing a new role in how we're making these decisions. So,
and it's hopefully becoming more prevalent because it's more accurate. It's a better.
In my experience, it is. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
So we discussed a lot of different neat things today about how we can control our SAR, really what the difference between SAR and B1+RMS is. And we know that it's the RF field that produces that heating in our patient, heating and burn risk to our patient. So it's not the gradient field, it's not that static magnetic field, it's the RF field. Depending on the tissue that we're actually exposing will determine the threat to our patient. So if we have tissues that have specific conductivity and permittivity, we might notice that there might be some hot spots in our patient, things that we're concerning in terms of patient heating. Now, SAR is an estimate, and it's essentially the absorbed dose over 6 minutes. So SAR is not an accurate value. It actually varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, but it's a calculation that we have over 6 minutes. So SAR is a calculation that we have typically over 6 minutes, according to the IEC, and it's measured in watts per kilogram, but it's an estimate. And as we have larger patients, if we have a larger patient, we notice that our SAR is going to increase the more mass our patient has. Now, we talked about some of the parameters that we could use to actually minimize some of that dose to our patient. Things that we can do are maybe delivering that RF over a longer duration, what we call a soft pulse. So if we deliver that RF pulse over a longer duration, we can ease those hydrogen to the transverse plane. We deliver that RF over a longer duration of time, but a lower energy. And that actually helps reduce SAR quite a bit, opposed to a hard pulse, which is a short duration, big burst of RF. And that would in turn not give us the results that we want in terms of lowering our SAR. Now, if we want to decrease our SAR, there's other things we can do. We can use a shorter flip angle. We can increase our TR. We could also increase our frequency encoding value in our image matrix. So that's a nice, easy way that we can increase our echo spacing. And then finally, another thing that we can do to decrease our echo spacing that's really helpful is decreasing our receiving bandwidth. Not only does that give us some signal, but that also increases the echo spacing, allowing for that patient to dissipate that heat a little more efficiently. So that's a nice tool that we have. Another thing that we talked about that was kind of neat is that we can actually sandwich pulse sequences between each other. So when we talk about, we basically say that I can have this pulse sequence that has a lot of RF to it, big RF pulse to it. And if we deliver that RF pulse and or deliver that sequence, that high energy RF sequence to our patient, and then we follow that sequence with something like a gradient echo, something like a lower RF contribution to our sequence, we can again build in this buffer where a patient can dissipate that heat a little more efficiently, and then put another high SAR sequence in there, and then a low SAR sequence and a high SAR, and start building that gap in there to reduce that SAR. Some other techniques out there where we said is lowering your echo train length, using parallel imaging, half Fourier. But half Fourier, we said that we fill 53% of our case space, and then we fill the rest with the zeros. So that's really kind of a nice tool that we have at our disposal. There's also some limits as well. We talked about the IEC limits, whole body versus localized heating. And then B1+RMS is an accurate, how much energy we're delivering to our patient. It's accurate. It's more accurate. SAR is an estimate. B1+RMS is an accurate value. It's how much energy we're actually delivering to our patient. All right.
No, that's awesome. Well, Matt, I don't know. Did we miss anything?
I don't think we did. I think we got everything.
Oh, we hit it, man. That was action-packed. That was a good episode. It's the reason why we keep inviting you back, man.
Thank
You're
you.
Right?
awesome.
And the shirts,
Appreciate
of course.
Oh, thank
And
you.
the
Thank
shirt,
you.
yes. It's distracting.
He
That-
keeps making his pecs go up and down.
I
I don't know
know.
if you guys notice
Dancing.
that. Yeah.
Does the camera pick that up?
We're just getting all distracted. I see him sweating.
Is that Old Spice? No, perfect.
Oh, yeah. You're awesome, man. Thank you. So just tell people your website real quick, if you would.
Right Advantage, www.rightadvantage, R-I-T-E,
Yeah,
advantage.com.
And I think we're going to be doing some CEU credits for this episode, right?
Yes.
So where would they go to find that?
I will give you guys a link, and you can
Yeah.
post it with the video.
We'll set that
perfect.
up with a link in the description. So stay tuned for that, guys, for sure. And of course, we appreciate all our watchers, our subscribers, everybody that just keeps coming back week after week. Man, Katie, anything else?
No, that's awesome.
All right.
Anything from the MRSO perspective of Katie?
You're on the spot.
I know, right? No, I kind of took some notes along the way, but you answered it as you talked, so.
Awesome.
Good.
Awesome. Nailed
Yeah.
it.
So I guess that's Zone 3 Podcast. We're out. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for telling your friends about us. Do all those things that YouTubers tell you to do. Reggie,
We love you guys. Zone 3
This is-
Podcast. Good.
we're out.